You know, when we think of government, it can seem like this huge, complex machine, right? But what if we thought about it more like a set of building blocks? Simple pieces that, when you put them together in different ways, create the systems that run our entire world. So let's take a look at that blueprint and see how those blocks actually fit together. It's a pretty fundamental question. I mean, if you strip away all the headlines and the politics, what is the core job of any government on the planet? Well, it turns out it really just boils down to three essential functions. And here they are. It's that simple. First, a government has to make the rules. That's the legislative part. Second, it has to put those rules into action and make sure they're followed. That's the executive part. And third, it has to interpret the rules and settle any arguments. The judicial part. Make, enforce, interpret. Every single government does these three things. Now, this whole idea of splitting up the work, it's not just about staying organized. It's actually a really big deal in political science called the separation of powers. The main goal here is to make sure no single person or group gets too much control. It's a foundational idea that you'll see in tons of modern governments. So, if every government is doing the same three things, what makes them all so different from each other? Well, the answer is simple. It's all about who gets to do those jobs. Let's check out 4 of the most basic blueprints for who gets to hold the power.
First up, we've got the oldest blueprint in the book, monarchy. Think kings, queens, emperors. In this system, one person has the final say. Now, historically, that power is absolute. But a lot of modern monarchies, like in the UK, for example, have rulers who are more like symbols of national unity than actual political powerhouses.
And the political scientist J.W. Garner really summed this up perfectly. He basically said, you can call them a king, you can call them an emperor. It doesn't matter. If one person's will is the final word on everything, you're looking at a monarchy. Okay, so what if it's not just one person in charge? Well, that brings us to aristocracy. The name itself gives you a huge clue. It comes from the Greek for rule of the best. In this case, power is in the hands of a small, elite group. And that status could come from anything: wealth, family name, military strength. The key thing to remember is it's ruled by a select few. Now, this one might sound kind of like a monarchy, but there is a massive difference. A dictator also has absolute power, but they get it through force, not because they inherited a crown. Their word becomes law, and they have zero accountability to the people they're ruling over. And that brings us to what is easily the most popular form of government today: democracy. And again, the name tells you everything you need to know. It comes from the ancient Greek words demos, which means people, and kritia, which means rule. You put them together, and what do you get? Ruled by the people. Of course, you absolutely cannot talk about democracy without this iconic line from Abraham Lincoln. It's famous for a reason. Of the people means the power comes from the citizens. By the people means we, the citizens, actually participate in making the government. And for the people means the whole point of the government is to work for the public good. Okay, so let's just do a quick side-by-side to make this super clear. Monarchy, one person rules based on their title. Aristocracy, a small group rules based on their status. Dictatorship, one person or group rules because they took power by force. And finally, democracy, the people rule through their vote. It's a really simple way to see who's calling the shots. So we've covered the what, making, enforcing, and interpreting laws. And we've covered the who, be it a king, an elite group, or the people. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty and meet the actual government bodies or organs that perform these 3 core jobs. First up, you've got the legislature. These are the lawmakers. Their main job is exactly what it sounds like. They create the laws. Now, they can be set up in one of 2 ways. Unicameral means there's just one chamber or one house. Bicameral means there are 2. You can think of it like having to get a law past one group of people versus 2. That structure really changes how fast things can get done. And if you want to see this in action, just look at India. It's a huge country, right? But out of its 28 states, a whopping 24 of them use that simpler, unicameral, single-house system. It's a perfect example of this blueprint being used on a massive scale. Next up, the executive. So if the legislature makes the laws, the executive branch is the one that actually puts them into practice. This is the government's operational arm. They're the ones managing everything from the military and police all the way down to schools and hospitals. They're the doers. And finally, we have the judiciary. Think of this branch as the referee. Their job is to figure out what the laws actually mean and how they apply in real situations.
So whenever there's a dispute, whether it's between two regular people or a person and the government itself, the judiciary is the one that makes the final call. All right, now this is where things get really interesting. See, in the real world, countries don't just pick one of these blueprints off a shelf. They actually mix and match all these different building blocks to create their own unique systems that fit their own history and their own needs. Let's look at the two most common democratic setups. First, there's the parliamentary system, which you see in places like India and the UK. Here, the executive and legislative branches are tied really closely together. The government is actually chosen from the parliament. But then you have the presidential system, like in the US. In that system, the executive is a totally separate, independent branch. So it's two very different ways to organize those same three core jobs. And these combinations can get pretty wild. I mean, take the UK. It's a democracy with a parliamentary system, but it's also technically a monarchy with a ceremonial king. Or look at India. It's a democratic republic with a parliamentary system, but it also mixes federal ideas, where power is shared with the states, and unitary ideas, where the central government still has a ton of authority. So that leaves us with one final puzzle for you. Now that you've seen all the building blocks, all the different ways to organize power and responsibility, how would you put them together? If you were designing a government from scratch, which pieces would you choose? Would you try to make it fast and efficient, or stable? Or maybe make sure everyone has a voice? It's more than just a thought experiment. How a nation answers that question defines the lives and the futures of every single one of its citizens.